addiction, prevention, recovery.
Welcome to the Recovery Rebirth Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recovery Rebirth Podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Jillian.
Today we're going to cover a rather serious topic, a topic that certainly affects people who are addicted to substances or people or money or a lot of things that can cause people to feel suicidal, to contemplate suicide. It's a very serious topic. Suicide is defined as the intentional act of taking one's own life, and it's pretty much tied directly to hopelessness.
Yeah.
If you've lost all hope and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, if there's nothing to look forward to anymore, people can become suicidal.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah.
Problems come and go throughout life. Everybody has 89 problems. Which ones do you want today?
Right. right.
That kind of thing. But we know that the pandemic that we're just coming out of the pandemic phase. There was a very high rate of overdoses.
Yeah. Yep.
The suicide rate, you had done some research, didn't change much, Jillian?
Yeah, that surprised me. So in preparation for our recording, I did a little cursory research because, and this is a perception thing, right? And an assumption thing on my part. I assumed that the rate of suicide might have increased during COVID because of the hopelessness and despair and, anxiety people were feeling, but it turns out it actually didn't. It decreased a little bit. So
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yep.
Actually, the statistics show that the people most likely to commit suicide are middle-aged men. Middle-aged men, and also older men. Men over 65 were most likely to die of suicide.
Yeah, I also found that so there's and I'll put all of this in the show notes because this is an episode that of course we want to be resource rich because it's such an important and heavy topic and we want to provide resources. But the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, so SAMHSA, I found on their website, it goes over some statistics, and rates of suicide in the U.S. are almost 4 times higher for men than women. I guess that surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, that you would think that I don't know, it would be more balanced, but it isn't. It really skews toward middle-aged white men.
Yeah. Yep.
And by the way, before we get too deep into the episode, I want to put out the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. Of course, we'll have it in our show notes, but I thought I'd put this out there right away in case anybody's feeling despair that could lead toward suicidal thoughts. You can call 800-1-800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255.
Yes.
The national helpline. And for those of you who are in the United States, I believe this is everywhere in our country, they've set up a 211 crisis hotline.
Yep.
So you can call 211 and they'll connect you with a crisis counselor depending on what you're going through and so forth.
Yep.
Because if you're feeling that hopeless, it really is a cry for help before the actual act is committed. And please, listeners, if you know somebody or you're in this situation, please cry out for help before you do a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those because I was going to. So Griffin Place is the local organization when in the Kalamazoo area where we're at. When you dial 211, you'll be connected. So that's the local agency.
And I believe they have national operators as well that take calls all over the country for that 211 exchange in different places. So, Jillian, you've got kind of a personal attachment to this topic from some personal experience. I know it's a sensitive topic, but would you be willing to share some of your experience with the suicide topic?
Absolutely, yeah. And this, when we first started brainstorming about this podcast, how long ago now has it been?
A little bit.
Pre-pandemic, suicide was one of the first. It was one of the topics we came up with because of the link between addiction and suicide. But more recently for me, I did have a few experiences. Not directly, but people close to me. And I also want to put out like a little trigger warning. Of course, given the topic, some of this could be triggering for listeners. So just want to put that out there because it's not a topic you can sugarcoat. So I did have 3 women very close to me earlier this year between January and March, I think it was. So 3 of my close friends who lost ex-boyfriends, people they weren't currently in a relationship with, but lost their exes to suicide. And at least 2 of those men had a long-standing, like couple decades-long battle with addiction, mental illness. Those we know, go hand in hand sometimes too. There's the comorbidity. The third person, he had definitely been in a downward spiral for a while. And my friend, when it happens, it's just very surreal, but she saw all the signs, like withdrawing from, quitting his job, like a lot of different things. That one was, of the 3, they were all terrible, but that one was the worst because he actually did it in front of his estranged wife.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so, I don't know, that one was with a gun. We talked a little bit before we started recording about the methods used, especially among men.
Yeah, do you know over half
Mm-hmm.
are gun-related suicides?
Yeah. I know at least in one of those 3 suicides, it was like strangulation or he hung himself. I don't know how the first one happened, but again, it just really hit me when I'm like 3 women very close to me in my inner circle have all lost somebody who and 2 of them had children with these. All 3 men were fathers. But the last friend, she was no longer in a relationship with this man and didn't have children with him. But the first 2 friends, they had been co-parenting with these 2 guys and then had to, try to console their children who lost their fathers in a very terrible way. But yeah, I noticed right away that I'm like, okay, at least 2 of these 3 men have long-standing histories with struggling with addiction and mental illness, mental health issues. So,
just out of curiosity, did they mention that they had started using it again prior to suicide?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that at least with the 2 who had known issues, I don't know how much sobriety they had. I think they were probably in that cycle that so many people can fall into of just relapsing, like getting a little stretch of sobriety and then relapsing. And I don't think they had any long-standing sobriety.
It'd be interesting to hear the stats on that. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. That's pretty scary. It's in the top 10.
Yes.
For cause of death in the U.S., according to the CDC.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned some of the warning signs, losing interest in, your work or school or whatever, withdrawing from friends, with isolation and withdrawal, this feeling of hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people start giving away their possessions as if they're meaningless. Here, take everything.
Yep.
Those are some of the danger signals, warning signs.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I would say is check on your friends. If they're normally social and all of a sudden they're antisocial.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt to reach out. Actually pick up the telephone and make a call. Are you okay?
Yeah.
To reach out to people. And when you do see the warning signs with people, maybe encourage them to get help, because really, I don't know if there's stats on this, but suicide or talking about suicide is a cry for help.
Yes. Yes.
Because if somebody really just wanted to commit suicide, they would do it, and they wouldn't say anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't.
Yep.
They wouldn't even leave a note.
Right.
Why leave a note? It's like after the fact, crying out for help.
Yes. So when people are actually talking about it, yes, it's often like there's still a chance to intervene and to say, hey, I'm concerned. I've noticed you've been withdrawing lately. Is everything okay? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to get out of the house? Because, from what I know and what I've heard, that people who are really serious about it, they just do it. They don't tell anybody.
Correct. And ironically, in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, if you go to open speaker talks, which are open to the public, anybody can go and listen at an open talk. I've heard people talk about a botched suicide attempt, and there's actually laughter in the room at that point. That's when you really know somebody's gotten some solid recovery, that you could joke about a botched suicide attempt. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing a story about one guy said he laid down on the train tracks, and he was hoping for this fast-moving train to just take him out. And a freight train was coming so slowly that he had time to think through it and decided to get off the track.
Was it like that scene in Austin Powers with the steamroller? That's what comes to mind. And the guy's he just stays there. Yeah, I digress.
I mean, it's such a serious topic, but when you hear people being able to laugh about it years later, that's recovery.
It is.
But when you're in the middle of it, I've been suicidal twice in my life. Mm-hmm. Once drunk, and once sober.
Yeah.
And I think the one that scared me more was sober.
Of course.
It lasted for about 10 seconds or less when I was sober, but it just the thought crossed my mind out of the blue that it would be a better world without me in it. Mm-hmm. And it scared the daylights out of me.
Yeah.
And I really started digging back into my program of recovery and trying to help others and supposedly doing all the right things.
Right.
And I don't want to die today. I want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to live a long time and be healthy.
Yeah.
But that takes some effort and some growth. But being drunk and feeling totally hopeless, that lasted a while, and it was leading up to what was going to be a gun suicide for me. I had already pictured it in my head and gone through it.
Yeah.
And then, out of the blue, it struck me that this is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yeah.
And somehow, I had a shred of hope. Mm-hmm. Just a shred of hope.
Yeah.
Came to light, and you don't want to do that. Right. And as if the voice in my head said, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Everybody has problems. We can overcome our problems if we stay sober, and if we are working a program and we have good people in our life to ask for advice and help. This business of isolation and trying to deal with it, I got this, is the worst words out of an addict's mouth.
Yeah, trying to go it alone is usually the path for relapse or worse. And we have different kinds of relapse, because my problem has never been alcohol or a substance. Has been an alcoholic or a dysfunctional man. And I too, like from even back when I was a teenager, I would have like suicidal thoughts, but mine was mostly, because of my poor sense of self-worth and low self-esteem, and then getting wrapped up in these relationships that would reinforce my low self-esteem, because I would feel abandoned over and over and over. And I would get to those, I'm not proud to admit it, it's, especially even after having kids, to feel that hopeless. I'm like, what the heck? I don't feel that way anymore. But there have been times that I have felt that way, like, my kids would be better off without me. And just, I don't know. That's a lot to unravel. But my brother, when he was still alive, he did attempt suicide in 2012.
Oh gosh.
And he had years, like he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at around 17, I think. And so he battled some serious, serious depression for decades. And for years, I thought, that it was just like, because sometimes it can be just a cry for help or try to get attention. I didn't think he would ever actually do it or attempt it. But he did. And he carved his arm up pretty well and took a bunch of, I think it was Tylenol. I don't know. He was unsuccessful, but it was one of the worst nights of my life. I got a call from my mom telling me that she didn't have many details, but that my brother, was in the hospital. My dad came over. I had to drive my dad to the hospital because he was a wreck. And when I called the hospital, they, because of HIPAA, and I understand that, they need to protect people's privacy, they couldn't give me too many details. And I remember asking the lady, if he was there, and she's like, I can't tell you. And I'm like, I don't know if my brother is alive. The police told my mom, that he was at the hospital, and she might have been putting herself at risk for even saying this. And she said, he's here, but he can't talk. So she confirmed he was there. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? He can't talk because he's dead? Or, that unknown. And it was just, it was one of the darkest nights of my life. And hearing my dad's, that it was one of the worst sounds I've ever heard, is hearing my dad sobbing, because what we do is we blame ourselves. That's just a common thread with anybody who experiences. I haven't personally lost somebody. I almost lost my brother to suicide, but that just seems to be the default for the loved ones is, what did I do wrong? It's my fault. I could have done something different. And I know my dad was grappling with that. And so we got to the hospital. My brother was still alive. But, he had all these scars for years after, where he tried to kill himself, evidence that he tried to kill himself. But yeah, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. It was horrific. It was just, and just to, to try to, I do have a sense, because I have felt that way, although I've never gone to the point where I have kind of mapped it out where this is how I would do it. But when somebody's feeling that low and that hopeless, to think that that is the only solution is to opt out of life. Yeah.
It's I hate to say this, and I apologize in advance if I offend anyone, but it has got to be the most self-centered, narcissistic thing in the world to commit suicide, playing God and saying, I'm better off dead, I'll fix this. That is really self-centered and selfish. And that means you're stuck in your own head. When I'm feeling self-centered and selfish, I'm stuck in my own head, and it's time for me to talk to other people. Yeah. And that's why we beg of you to please reach out for help. I don't mean that to sound offensive, but right. It's like you're putting a period at the end of a sentence that isn't complete.
To be a semicolon.
It shouldn't be. Well, isn't the semicolon a suicide
yes,
survivor
it actually
kind of thing?
Is. I didn't think that just came out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh right. I mean, that's a tattoo that people get.
That's a tattoo that people get when I don't know if they've survived suicide or had suicide in the family or friend or something like that.
Could be either or. And I've often heard what you just said, that's a terribly selfish thing to do. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know. Yes, and I understand that feeling of the world would be better off without. I've had those thoughts, and it sucks. It's a terrible place to be, but I don't know. But I would encourage anybody who's feeling like that's the only way out to please reconsider, because whether or not you believe it, there are people who love you and will miss you, and it will impact their lives. They will be there will be just a wound that I don't know how you ever heal that. There's just going to be this emptiness in them, and that's not to guilt trip, but I think sometimes people, when they get to that point, they truly believe no one would miss me anyhow. That's not true. That's not true.
That is so correct. It is not true. People will miss you. People will be confused and not be able to understand why you couldn't see hope in the future. Mm-hmm. That's. Once again, I repeat that you should get help and talk to other folks, because maybe somebody could help you find the permanent problem, and you could come up with a temporary solution instead of a permanent one. Yeah. To fix what's wrong. I know from being hopeless myself, being in that position, feeling totally hopeless, that it does turn around.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person in long-term recovery, I've experienced times of despair.
Mm-hmm.
And those times have turned back around.
Yeah.
So I know things change if you give it time.
Yeah. And I know if you could just hang on just a little bit longer. And there's songs that are coming to me right now. There's one by Peter Gabriel. It's Peter Gabriel and Kate Bush, actually. And that always gets me choked up. It's called Don't Give Up. I think it's second. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I might just have to put a link to the YouTube video in the show notes. And there's another one. My son introduced me to a musician, a rapper named Logic, a handful of years ago. And he actually has a song, and the title of the song has that suicide prevention number in it, that the 1-800-273-8255 is actually in the title of that song. And that one always makes me cry too. But, it's for those of us left behind who lose someone to suicide, it feels like there's just questions and no answers. And it's a special, complicated kind of grief. Like, there's many different kinds of grief, and we've done some podcasts on grief.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the most complicated, because if somebody dies of cancer, if somebody dies in a car accident, if somebody dies of a heart attack, there's still grief. But with this, it's like, I feel like you will be left with this lifelong wondering, like, what could I have done differently? How could I have stopped this? Just that crushing guilt. I don't know how. I mean, with time, of course, that can be lessened. But again, listeners, if this resonates for you, if you've felt that hopeless and that's the only way out, or that's the only option, please reconsider. Please check some of the resources we'll share. Please check in with somebody, because again, you will be missed. There's more for you to do on this earth, and I really believe that everybody listening to this, we all have a sense of purpose, and but we have to be here to realize that sense of purpose.
That's a great statement. You do have a purpose. Your life is not a throwaway. You're here for some sort of reason, even if it doesn't make sense at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are some questions that can be asked if you think a person is suicidal and you want to try to get some feeling for where they're at, like asking them how they're coping with their challenges or problems. How are you coping with it?
Mm-hmm.
And if they have no answers, you know that they might be hopeless. They have no coping mechanisms in place for their challenges. Or being more direct and saying, are you thinking about hurting yourself?
Wow.
Are you thinking about suicide? Asking the tough question. Mm-hmm. I've been in situations where people are pretty messed up and desperate. I mean, I'm also a certified recovery coach, and have taken calls from people who have been in pretty rough shape mentally and physically. And I've asked them flat out, do you want to die? Are you thinking about doing it yourself, or you just, do you want to die the slow, painful death of continuing to drink?
Right.
That's a form of suicide also, if you're going to continue to drink. And then maybe saying something like, do you have a plan?
Right.
Have you made a plan for this? It can be a simple question like that, and if somebody says, "Yep, I've made a plan. I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing," then you're in a dangerous zone.
Right.
You've gone from yellow caution to red. This is an emergency.
Yes.
And a crisis situation. I've even gone so far as to say, I'm thinking about doing a wellness check on somebody.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from them. They're not answering their phone. Mm-hmm. I'm going to show up at their house and knock on the door, and I know they're inside. They better answer.
Right.
At one point, I was going to bring a police officer with me, and we were ready to kick the door in if necessary. Been through this with folks, and where they've been in pretty rough shape. It's not fun.
I mean, it happens so much in recovery, unfortunately, like we mentioned earlier. And I was looking at some of those statistics from the SAMHSA site again. So like, 4 times as men are 4 times as likely. But if you look at addiction and suicide, the connections there. And again, these are 2016 statistics. I think, let me just double check, and I will include a link, but it's 22% of deaths by suicide in the U.S. involve alcohol intoxication. And then 20%, so opiates, including heroin and prescription painkillers, are present in 20% of suicide deaths in the U.S.
Well, in 2020, more men died to suicide by close to 4 times more than women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on the average, there are 130 suicides per day.
Not surprising.
That
Sadly.
seems quite high. It's scary.
Yeah.
How many people are that hopeless?
Mm-hmm.
And once again, a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Right.
We all have problems, and I think a lot of, I'm just going to take a stretch here. I think a lot of the older white men, according to the stats, that are committing suicide, I mean, a lot of it has to do with depression.
Yes.
That's been proven. That's a stat that you can look up, the research, that depression is a big one. But also, I think financial worries.
Yeah.
As much as we'd like to think society has evolved, men are still looked at in a lot of ways as breadwinners.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we have more women breadwinners these days, which we do, men are still looked at as a breadwinner, and it can be pretty hopeless if you feel this financial pain coming on, and you've been taught since you were a baby that you are the man, you're the breadwinner.
You're the provider, and you feel that pressure.
And you feel that constant pressure to do that it might be easier to, to end your life than to try to continue it if you feel hopeless and there's no solution.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can get stressed out about money. I can be in a fear situation where I'm, fight or flight mode, adrenaline pumping, fear of money situations and problems. I've been there. Mm-hmm. I've been broke down to my last $10. Mm-hmm. I know what it feels like. But I always thought as long as I have my health, I can turn that back around. It stinks. It just, flat out stinks to have to be broke.
Yeah.
But as long as you're alive and healthy, and for me, as long as I'm alive, healthy, and sober, I can hopefully dig out of that's a temporary situation.
Yes.
But finances kill people.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and right now there's just so much of that because there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of, I think a lot about, and this ties back to a previous podcast that has already been released on homelessness and people experiencing homelessness. I worry so much right now about folks who are on the bubble, who were barely getting by, living to check to check already before the current state of the economy, and with gas prices and food costs rising. So I worry about food security for folks. I worry about housing for folks. I mean, that's a huge amount of stress.
On you or on the people that are already?
On all of us, I'm feeling it some. I'm fortunately in a position where, I got a new position, which came with a raise at work, so I don't feel that stress as much. But I know there are a lot of people, I was for years, we talked about this in that working poor category. So that's, if you don't know if you're going to be able to provide housing for yourself or your family or, put food on the table. There's just, that financial economic stress is so pronounced right now.
It is, it's a painful situation, and it's really hard to go backwards once you've gone forwards. It's like you're playing the Monopoly game and it says, do not pass go, do not collect your $200.
Right.
And that adds up after a while.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to go through it again. I hope I never have to go through it again. But I have to remember for myself, if I start feeling hopeless, that as long as I have my health and my sobriety, I can continue to make changes that'll end up in the positive.
And I will say that, now that I've come through the other side, and, for me, the this too shall pass, I had to remember that when I was when I was at my rock bottom, or, when I was in those dark times. I'm so grateful that I'm still here, and that because it was survivable, even if it didn't feel like it was at the time, even if I couldn't envision life ever getting any better. Life is so much better than I ever thought it could be when I was at my lowest point. So, yeah. So
I'm definitely grateful that I'm still here and that I didn't take that extra step. I was killing myself slowly with alcohol.
Right.
And I was going to die anyway. And then I was thinking about accelerating the process, and obviously chickened out of that, or maybe it was an intervention from a power greater than myself. But that thought went away, and I didn't follow through with it, and I'm really grateful that I didn't. And I'm grateful that I'm not suicidal today. I want to be healthy. I want to be vibrant. I want to live a long time and be a contributor wherever I can be. I'll close. I'm going to close out my thoughts on this with a note from a book I read on happiness. Trying to find happiness. What is happiness? And true happiness comes from giving. And if you feel like you can't give or contribute, you're not going to be as happy, no matter how much you have. So you could have all the possessions in the world and not be happy if you're not contributing and giving to someone else's life. And that true happiness comes from that gift of giving. So if you want to find happiness, look for ways where maybe you can help somebody else, and maybe that'll help you with the depression. It'll help you with the feeling of a lack of self-worth. Your worth will come back to you. Give something somewhere to other people. Volunteer, at a nonprofit or a food bank or somewhere. Volunteer for one of the organizations that help the homeless.
Yeah.
I found over the years in recovery that if I'm feeling depressed or sad about something, not to diminish my own sadness or my own depression, but I go listen to other people's stories and I realize I haven't got it that bad.
Right. Perspective. Yep.
You have some closing thoughts, Jillian?
Yeah, for me, I would just say that, again, if there's anyone listening to this right now who's at a rock bottom or feeling incredibly low and feeling hopeless, I would encourage you, please don't give up, and just hang on just for today, as they say in recovery, right? Just for today. And we will share resources in the show notes, but please reach out rather than reaching for something to end that permanent solution to a temporary problem. Reach for a phone instead, please.
That number, once again, is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 800-273-8255. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, listeners.